Okay, we're going to have to do a slight redo here. I'm going to do the video about how the earth was divided. This is be the illustrated version in the days of Peleg. The two sons were born to Eber, one named Peleg because in his time the earth was divided. This is the Bible verse that the idea hinges on, that my particular belief in how the earth was divided. It's actually a verse that actually says that the earth was divided in the days of Peleg. Many people take that to mean that the people were divided, because that was also the time of the Tower of the Babel when the languages were confused. Each family went their own way. Problem with that is that it doesn't actually say that the people were divided. It says the earth was divided. And it was slightly before the confusion of the languages, if you read the text, if that's the way the text is read, straightforward, a reading of the text. Okay. Now hold on a second, I'm going to have to redo this thing here, because somehow this is not what it's supposed to be. Okay, I don't believe that the Atlantic ridge split is what caused the global flood. I don't believe that it happened or occurred at the time of the beginning of the global flood. I don't believe that the split, the Atlantic ridge split apart and shot to the moon. I do believe that water came from above in the form of rain, and from below in the form of the fountains of the deep. I believe the Atlantic ridge split happened 100 years after the global flood, and this is my supporting evidence, is that 100 years after the global flood, the sediment layers hardened, they became brittle, and were ready to break apart, and possibly or probably broke apart with the help of an asteroid hitting Central America. Then there was a tectonic undercurrent that shoved India into Asia, and the continents basically broke apart at that time, including the Atlantic ridge, which probably went up above water as soon as the Americas went as far as they could go. The Atlantic ridge probably pushed up above the water, above the sea level, and then sank back down at a later time, which is another story that might include Atlantis. But anyways, beyond the Straits of Gibraltar, but that's another rabbit hole. I don't know if there's any literature supporting this idea, although I think there should be some, even if there isn't. Come to think of it, the shock the shock of the earth being broken apart like that would have been a big shock, a great shock to the people. And whenever there's a catastrophic event of that kind, what people do is they tend to run to their family. They run to their father, their mother, their brothers, their sisters, see if everybody's okay, and they want to go and help their own family, protect their own family. So this is likely what happened when, in the days of Peleg, when the earth was divided. Everybody ran to their own families and became somewhat isolated as they were describing what was going on, and it's probably when each family ended up speaking their own language and were unable to understand other families who were, doing the same thing, consolidating into their family units, and that's probably what contributed or even caused the separation of the languages at the time they were building the Tower of Babel. Okay, so there's more evidence, and there's no fantastical belief needed, because God works through natural means. A lot of the miracles in the Bible are actually natural occurrences. Not to underrate miracles, just that's how God works. God works through natural events. And if you walk with the Lord, you will be able to attest to that God works through everything. And that everything is for a reason. Of course, there's more evidence. There is a sediment layer. I don't even know if I have it included in my description. I should include it in the description. There's a sediment layer that goes from the North America to Europe, and it's actually the same layer that was separated. And if the Atlantic Rift happened at the beginning of the flood, there wouldn't be a sediment layer that goes from North America to Europe, because that's where the rift goes through, and so you wouldn't expect there to be the same layer there. But if it broke apart after the global flood, 100 years after the global flood, you could easily see how that could happen. Because it would just break apart the existing sediment layer, and you have the same layer on both sides of the rift. And that's the same thing with the animals. I have 3 examples of animals that were separated on both sides of the Atlantic Ridge. So these 3 animals I have, let me see, that would be the jaguar and the leopard, the honey badger and the greater grayson, and the American crocodile and the African crocodile. So let me just go ahead and see if I can illustrate that, if I can. So yeah, in the days of Peleg, we had the breaking up of the continents. The earth was divided. And in South America, we have an animal called the jaguar. And the jaguar really is the same thing as a leopard. They're entirely compatible with each other, with no problems with interbreeding. It's just that one is in South America, the other one's in Africa. And they have a slightly different pattern on their coat. If you'll notice, the jaguar has larger splotches and a little bit more separated spots, with sometimes a little splotch in the middle, a little dash in the middle of the spots. And the leopard almost has an identical coat, but it's not exactly the same. So if I can illustrate that, the African leopard is really the same animal, if you ask me. And if you would compare their genomes, they would be copies of the same common ancestor. They would have their copies. Their genome would be copies of the same original kind, or their same common ancestor. And just because I say common ancestor doesn't mean that everything has a common ancestor. I'm just referring to the common ancestor of the leopards in Africa and the jaguars in South America. Of course, so you can see how similar these are, right? We got the leopard And you got the jaguar. The jaguar has almost identical markings on it, with just slightly larger spots with a little splotch in the middle in some cases. And you notice the darker marks on the bottom, but individual cats are different, of course. You're not all the cats are the same, but generally speaking, you'll see on the jaguar, you'll see the spots are larger, and they often have or sometimes have a splotch in the middle, especially on the rib cage area, the torso area. Okay, so that's almost identical to the leopard, except of course the leopard has smaller spots. Basically, that's all the only difference. And of course, they're separated by over 4,000 years. Because the rift of the Atlantic Ridge happened 100 years after the global flood, so that's over 4,000 years. It's 4,000 what, 300 years or so. So in all that time, they didn't change very much, considering. And my second example is the greater Grison. Now, this greater Grison might look like a honey badger, but it's actually not. It's the South American version of the honey badger, which is a Mustelidae. It's a skunk-like animal. They call it a weasel. It's not actually a badger. It's a weasel. Notice the long neck. But it's a ground weasel. They don't jump to the trees, because there are weasels that will immediately jump into the trees. This is not a weasel that climbs trees. It stays on the ground. I'm sure it could climb a tree if it wants, but that's not the point. It is that very much at home on the ground, and he spends most of its time on the ground, because it also hunts snakes too. Of course, I guess if it saw a snake in a tree, it would go after it too. But this is not a honey badger. It might look like a honey badger because it probably is a copy of the original ancestor of the honey badger. Probably the same kind. If you compare the genomes between the two, they would probably be the same animal. So I have here also a picture of the honey badger, which is really pretty much the same animal. If you didn't know, I will point out the difference between the ears. Notice the ear on the honey badger is down more below the white stripe that's on top, and the in the greater Grison, the ear is above. It's above the black area. It's more in the white area. And of course, I'll put in a plug for my other video. I have another video. It's in the description. It'll be in the description, where it's a very similar animal, except that the head and the neck are white. And then there's a clear-cut line between the shoulder, where the shoulder blade is, between the white head and neck and the black body. And I actually have a video of one of these things, and it's not a tree weasel either. It's just like these, sticks to the ground, and it acts a lot like these skunks, basically what it is. Only it's a special kind of it's probably new to science. Probably nobody's ever seen it before. I mean, I talked to the people in Brazil there, and nobody ever saw one like it. So maybe I'm the only one that's ever seen it, and maybe it's a new species. Maybe it's a new kind. Of course, that would be a variation of the same kind, of course. because it is the same. It doesn't pay attention to anything that's going on around it. It makes all kinds of noise, and is rummaging through the forest floor, and it just goes on about its business, the same as a honey badger, just like a honey badger and the greater grayson too. The only difference is that the entire head and neck is white, and the from the shoulders on back is black. And I have a video of that, and you can probably see it in the description, even though you probably can't see it very well, but might still be able to see it. So this would be the greater grayson. This is the honey badger from Africa, and if you would compare the genomes, they'd probably be copies of the same common ancestor. And my third example is the American crocodile as compared to the African crocodile and the saltwater crocodile. If you'll notice, it's got a flat head and long snout that proceeds from the flat head, and of course you can pay attention to the protruding tooth that goes down. It's almost like a Spinosaurus jaw, and you know how it's all weird shaped, but it's basically, and the Spinosaurus is probably the Leviathan of the biblical sea monster, called Leviathan because the Spinosaurus is it's a sea monster, but it also comes out on land. It can come out on land, stand up on its hind legs, look down at everything, and then it goes back into the sea. So it's very similar in shape, the mouth of the Spinosaurus. But notice the flat kind of eyes and the flat head and the long snout, and you'll see that it's very similar both to the Nile crocodile. Notice again the flat head, flat eyes, and the long snout, and the same kind of jaw, the Spinosaurus-like jaw. Of course, it's not exactly the same, but it's pretty similar if you ask me. But of course, the Spinosaurus was different. It could stand up and breathe fire and everything, you know, at least according to the biblical account. The one in the Bible, the sea monster in the Bible described, is one that can breathe fire, which, you know, some interesting things you can do chemically with salt water. That's pretty interesting. But anyways, and then of course there would be the saltwater crocodile too, which is known to live in Australia and of course even the Philippines. And it's got the same flat head, the flat eyes, the long snout, and the funny looking jaw, like a Spinosaurus jaw. So these things all live in different places where after the continents broke apart, and especially the American crocodile and the African Nile crocodile, they've been separated for over 4,000 years, maybe 4,300 years or so, and they look very similar. Of course, in South America, there's also the caiman too, which is a crocodilian-like alligator, but it looks more crocodile than it does alligator because it has teeth. The teeth are protruding outside the jaw, outside the mouth. An alligator, the teeth are pretty much inside the mouth, but a caiman and a crocodile teeth are outside the mouth. So this is my evidence, along with, of course, the sediment layer that goes between North America and Europe, which is evidence it broke. The Atlantic ridge broke apart after the global flood. And the reason for the breakup of the continents likely could have been an asteroid, but it was because of the sediments becoming hard and brittle, and basically just broke apart when struck by an asteroid, probably. So, and that asteroid strike is probably what accounts for the undercurrents pushing India into Asia as well. So there was a lot of upheaval, a lot of turmoil. You know, you could imagine living in the days of Peleg when the earth was divided, and then shortly afterward the people were divided because everybody coalesced into family groups, you know, take care of their family, their mother, their brothers, their sisters, and before you knew it, they were unable to understand the other families that had done the same thing, responded in the same way from the catastrophe of the earth being divided. So that's probably how it fits together, nice and neat, because the animals had plenty of time to get where they were going in 100 years before the breakup of the continents, and the animals had spread apart. So, you know, as soon as they got off the ark, the animals took off to where they were going, but the people hung around and tried to build the Tower of Babel until the earth was divided, and then they spread out, and so that then they had to reach America by way of crossing the ice and boats and whatever, you know. So that's how they reached America. They weren't able to walk straight between Africa and America because they didn't spread apart until 100 years after the global flood. So this is just more evidence of the Bible being true to reality, facts, and history and science. And of course, there is no evidence for a natural cause of any kind, and it's just more evidence that a Christian can't be wrong, because the Christian tells the truth. It's not a religion. He's telling the truth that only your Maker, that you have a Maker in the first place, and only your Maker can be your Savior. So your hope is in your Maker and in nobody else. So you'd better develop your relationship, or have a good relationship with your Creator, because you don't want to meet your Maker in a bad situation. And when you meet your Maker, you want it to be under good circumstances. You don't want it to be under bad circumstances. So that's about it. And I hope that everybody is able to know the Lord. And because the same way that the global flood destroyed the world with water, the next time the world is going to be destroyed is with fire. And we want to be ready when the Lord comes back for us.